Добрый день, глубоко уважаемые.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear guests. Today is the 12th of March 2022. It's 3 p.m. Moscow time. We're beginning the session of the Dissertation Council for the defense of the dissertation by Nikita Prigodich, Scientific Specialty 561, National History. The topic of the dissertation is the rear support of aviation operations in the defense of Leningrad, 1941-1944. Under the order issued by the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg State University, number 1606/1, I, Professor Mikhail Khodyakov, Professor of St. Petersburg State University, have been appointed the chairperson of the Dissertation Council. The other members of the Dissertation Council have been appointed by the same order. They are Professor Nikita Lomagin, Doctor of Historical Sciences, St. Petersburg State University. Professor Елена Tverdyukova, Doctor of History, St. Petersburg State University. Professor Boris Kovalyov, St. Petersburg Institute of History, Russian Academy of Science. Professor Елена Krasnozhenova, St. Petersburg Polytechnic University. And one of our members is attending the session online. This is our colleague, Professor Alexei Timofeyev, Doctor of History, Professor of the University of Belgrade, Serbia. Professor Timofeyev, can you hear us and see us? Yes, I can hear you and see you. The candidate for the degree, Nikita Prigodich, is also here. The research advisor, Doctor of History, Professor Gennady Sobolev, is also here. I would like to ask the members of the Dissertation Council who are participating in the session online to switch off their microphones. Please make sure that your microphone is switched on when you are given the floor. The session of the Dissertation Council is being recorded and broadcast on the website of St. Petersburg State University and is being interpreted into English. You can ask questions and make comments about the dissertation using the email address that you can find on the official website of St. Petersburg State University. You can ask questions or make comments about the dissertation and the presentation. This will allow you to participate in the academic discussion. The technical personnel will refer the questions to me and I will read them out during the discussion. The questions are supposed to be relevant to the presentation or to the contents of the dissertation. The authors of the questions are to write down their name, position, and workplace. The questions that are not relevant to the contents of the dissertation and anonymous questions will not be read out. Under the order on the procedure of granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University, issued by St. Petersburg State University, hereinafter referred to as the order, the session of the Dissertation Council is duly constituted, provided at least 2/3 of the members of the Dissertation Council are present. The total number is not to be fewer than 4 people. This Dissertation Council consists of 6 people, 6 of which are present, including 1 person who is participating in the session online. Therefore, we have a quorum. Now, I would like to ask the representative of the Department for Dissertation Council Management to make an attendance list. The agenda is as follows. The session will last for about 2 hours. Number 1. The chairman's presentation about the documents submitted by the degree seeker and their conformity with the requirements. Replies to questions, if any, about 5 minutes. Number 2. The academic degree seeker's presentation providing an overview and findings of the research, about 15 minutes. Number 3. Questions to the degree seeker, no more than 2 minutes for each question. Number 4. Replies to the questions, no more than 5 minutes. Number 5. External reports. Number 6. Reports on the dissertation. The council members will be taking the floor in turns. About 10 minutes per person. Number 7. The chairman's presentation on the dissertation, or rather the chairman's report on the dissertation. The academic degree seeker's comments about the reports on the dissertation, no more than 20 minutes. Number 9. Open discussion. The floor will be given to the members of the audience. They can give a brief account of their ideas or ask questions about the research. No more than 2 minutes per person. I would like to say that it is necessary to fill in the registration form and give their full name, academic degree, position and workplace before the talk. Number 10. The chairperson will read the questions received via email. Please note that questions which take more than 2 minutes to read will not be read out. Number 11. Replies to the questions, no more than 2 minutes per question. Number 12. Presentation of the dissertation supervisor, no more than 3 minutes. Number 13. Deliberations of the members of the Dissertation Council before the open balloting on conferring or non-conferring the academic degree. The discussion of the results of the defense is not broadcast. Number 14. Open balloting, vote counting and recording the results in the protocol. Number 15. Making a decision on whether to confer or not the academic degree. And 16. The academic degree seeker's closing speech, no more than 2 minutes. This is the agenda for today. Do you have any questions or objections? I do not see any objections. Therefore, I would like to proceed with the agenda. Please leave your telephone set on silent mode. The council members that are participating in the session online are advised not to switch off their mobile phones so that we can contact you in case of a technical failure. Thank you. And now I would like to proceed with the agenda. So my short presentation. The dissertation is submitted in conformity with the requirements for the academic degree of the candidate of Historical Sciences, Scientific Specialty 561, National History. The topic of the dissertation is the rear support of aviation operations in the defense of Leningrad, 1941-1944. The dissertation was approved for the defense by the order of the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg State University. The dissertation was completed in St. Petersburg State University, and Mr. Prigodich was a postgraduate student. The research advisor is Professor Gennady Sobolev, St. Petersburg State University. The academic degree seeker has published 5 research papers. One paper has been published in peer-reviewed journals recommended by the Ministry of Education and Science. 4 papers have been published in the journals recommended by the, or rather in the journals indexed by Web of Science and Scopus. The degree seeker has submitted a full set of documents to the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg State University. The documents are stored in the dossier. The representative of the Department for Dissertation Council Management has the copies of the documents. Before giving the floor to the degree seeker, I would like to ask the members of the Dissertation Council if they have any questions to the academic degree seeker, and if it is necessary to read out the list of documents. I suppose it's not necessary, therefore I give the floor to Mr. Prigodich. You have 15 minutes. The floor is yours. Good afternoon. Dear members of the Dissertation Council, I would like to make a short presentation and to give you an overview of my dissertation. During the Great Patriotic War, Soviet aviation found itself in an extremely difficult situation. A number of factors contributed to these circumstances, which did not allow to change the state of affairs in the airspace on the Soviet-German front until the middle of at least 1943. First, the outdated Air Force control system, where military formations were divided into front lines, units subordinate to the commander of the Front Air Force, and army units controlled by land armies, which complicated the process of making operational decisions. Secondly, the restructuring of the airfield work in the Western Military District, which started early in 1941. The result was an acute shortage of runways. And thirdly, the limited acquisition of aviation units with new equipment. The commissioning of improved aircraft models took place in aviation regiments in fragments, starting from the spring-summer of 1941. The location of the vast majority of aviation industry plants in the western and central regions of the European part of the USSR for a long period excluded the possibility of producing material parts for the Air Force. The solution of the main problem was complicated by additional factors. First of all, the General Headquarters of the Armed Forces and the State Defense Committee directed the available reserves to the central direction of the enemy's army offensive. The exception in this respect was the Leningrad front, which could not be placed in a standardized scheme of military priority. In addition, the very location of the city and the difficulties of its supply only aggravated the situation. The severe state of the proximity of the front to urban industrial facilities and a large number of civilians caused daily artillery shelling and frequently air raids by enemy aircraft. At the same time, the aviation leadership was forced to use a new strategy, which would be later what they applied throughout the Soviet military aviation. This situation forced the Military Council of the Leningrad Front to make challenging decisions. So these aspects form the basis of the relevance of the study as a fundamental basis for studying the reform of the Soviet Air Force in 1940–1943. The object of the study is the aviation rear of the Red Army in the Great Patriotic War. The subject of the study is the activity of rear aviation units to ensure the actions of aviation in the defense of Leningrad. The chronological framework of the study covers the period from the beginning of 1941 to June 1944. The lower chronological boundary is due to the fact that it affects large-scale restructuring of all areas, starting with airfield construction and renovation of the material part. With the course of the war, and the transformation of the front's air forces, the mobility and efficiency of aviation increased. In August 1944, by the end of military operations against Finland, the Air Force's logistical support activities in the defense of Leningrad were actually stopped, and the rear units were relocated to other sections of the front. The territorial scope of the study is determined exclusively by the areas of military operations. The purpose of the work is to analyze and evaluate the role played by rear aviation units. The purpose of the study involves the following tasks: to determine the level of combat readiness of the aviation, to analyze the quantitative and qualitative composition of the material part of the Air Force, to determine the degree of interaction of the rear units with the city authorities, to trace the main stages of the formation of the Leningrad airfield work in the pre-war period and its transformation during the year of the blockade, to identify the degree of participation of aviation units in the main military operation, to conduct a comparative analysis of the staffing level of the rear units. The source base of the research is an extensive set of published and unpublished documents. The documents introduced into scientific circulation concerning both the issues of the defense and the blockade of Leningrad are of particular value. The first collection of documents were released during the war, but they contained information that only directly affected the situation. Of greater interest to us are the documents published in the second half of the 60s. However, I would like to emphasize the value of the newer documents. First of all, Leningrad under siege and the siege of Leningrad. In recent years, the results of many years of work by St. Petersburg scientists have been published. This allows the researcher to turn to various aspects of the situation of the city during the war. In this series, the publication Blockade in the Decision of the leading party bodies of Leningrad should be noted, and as well as Leningrad War, the Blockade. The memoirs of the participants is also a very valuable source of information for us. Many military leaders, engineers, pilots and aircraft mechanics touch upon the topic of aviation rear. The most valuable in this regard are the memoirs of staff members, such as notes of aviation commander Novikov, who revealed many aspects of interaction and internal staff work. The memoirs written by the chief aviation engineer Avgeev and his deputy Shepelev are also of great interest. Among the unpublished sources, it is necessary to highlight the memoirs of the military medic Feinberg, who left important evidence of the work of the sanitary units in the rear force units. His notes are preserved in the manuscript departments of the Russian National Library. Interview recordings are also of high value to us, and the internet portal Memoirs of the Veteran of the Great Patriotic War. The materials of the federal, regional and departmental archives of the Russian Federation were used as the fundamental basis of the research. First of all, it should be noted that the main array of sources about the actions of the aviation and the work of rear units is stored in the Central Archive of the Ministry of the Defense. All materials that fall within the scope of the framework placed in fund number 217. The main layer of documents was deposited in the inventory of cases for the Leningrad Front Air Force. Documents relating to the time after November 1942 are located in fund number 362. The inventory of cases on the rear management of the 13th Air Army is also stored there. In order to provide a comprehensive description of the logistics. Documents of the 2nd Leningrad Air Defense Department were also used in the research. The funds of the Russian State Archive of Socio-Political History are of particular interest to the researcher of logistics supply. Documents revealing the issues of interaction between the Leningrad Front Air Force Headquarters and Leningrad Front Military Council in Fund number 77, as well as the latter's contacts on aviation and ensuring its activities with the headquarters of the Supreme High Command and the State Defense Committee in Fund numbers 83 were used. Issues of airfield construction are stored in the main Directorate of Airfield Construction of the NKVD of the USSR of the State Archive of the Russian Federation. Information on the logistical support of the actions of the civil aviation fleet of the USSR is contained in the documents of the Russian State Archive of Economics. As part of the study, we analyzed the materials of Foundation number 9527. Certain issues of interaction between the Leningrad Front Air Force Command and the Leningrad Party leadership are contained in the materials of the city and regional committees of the Central State Archives of Historical and Political Documents of St. Petersburg. Materials from the industrial departments of the city committee were also used in the research. I also used unpublished sources of personal origin about the actions of aviation from the fund of the Leningrad Institute of Historical and Political Studies. Materials characterizing the logistic support of the Leningrad local air defense aviation are stored in the Central State Archive of St. Petersburg. The archives also contain documents on the activities of the Northwestern Directorate of the Civil Air Fleet of the USSR. The main body of information revealing the provisions of the rear work of the Red Banner Baltic Fleet Air Force is kept in the Central Archive of the Navy. Researchers have recently had an opportunity to get acquainted with a certain amount of materials posted in an electronic format on the website of the largest Russian archives. The source of the study was significantly expanded due to the electronic documents. Bank, Memory of the People. The most complete is the first year of the Great Patriotic War from June 1941 to June 1942. Another valuable resource is the portal Documents of the Soviet Era, prepared by specialists of the Russian State Archive of Socio-Political History. The scientific novelty of the study is as follows. It is connected with a comprehensive approach to the study of the process of ensuring the actions of aviation in the defense of Leningrad, both from the side of military formations and from the point of view of organizing the supply of aviation using intra-city resources. The work of the rear of the Air Force is traced in stages, including numerous aspects. We also introduced in scientific discourse a number of sources from regional, federal, and departmental archives. This circumstance made it possible to close the formed historiographical lacuna. The main research outcomes are as follows. The enemy's offenses in June 1941 found the structure of the rear units in a stage of reorganization. The period of normalization of the situation took several months and ended only by mid-autumn. In the future, the control system of the aviation rear underwent significant changes. Number 2, the quantitative composition of the material part by the beginning of the conduct of facilities corresponded to the pre-war tasks assigned to aviation. However, colossal losses of the first period of the war reduced the number of aircraft to a minimum. So the Air Force was forced to concentrate on individual tasks. The situation changed only by mid-1943, when the replenishment of aircraft spare parts and components began to arrive. And in summer of 1941, aircraft of new types accounted for no more than 15%, which changed in the future. The management of the RIA and the Aviation Command, in cooperation with the Military Council of the Leningrad Front, had to resort to the assistance of the city administration to mobilize the resource base. The mobilization of Leningrad industry for the tasks of aviation units during the war became the most important factor in maintaining the combat capability of the Air Force, especially during the most difficult period of the winter of 1941-1942. Despite the impressive volume of the airfield work, only a limited number of flying fields were used during the most difficult period from autumn 1941 to spring 1943. The military air formations of the Leningrad Front, naval aviation and the Air Defense Army had to divide the flying fields among themselves. The situation on the Volkhov Front turned out to be no better due to the unsuitable state of the soil, of the construction of airfields of any type. The main tasks of the rear formations of the Air Force in the defense of Leningrad were to ensure the actions of aviation in support of defensive operations, of ground armies, bombing and assault attacks on communication nodes and enemy airfields, the defense of its own transport and logistical system and transportation. The peculiarity of completing the rear formation with personnel during the period of military operations was the constant shortage of military personnel. The situation was aggravated by the practice of sending enlisted men fit for combat service to ground units. The most active were the periods starting from 1941, during which more than 400,000 flights were made. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions? Are there any questions to the degree seeker? There are no questions. Therefore, let us move on to reading the reports on the dissertation. I would like to remind you that the degree seeker can answer the questions after each report is read out or after all the reports have been read out. But usually we ask the academic degree seeker to answer the questions after each report, so I suppose we follow this tradition. We have not received any external reports. Now I will ask the members of the Dissertation Council to read out their reports. Does anybody want to start? We can choose the person who wants to start. Or we can follow the order that I have in my list. I give the floor to Professor Nikita Lomagin. You have up to 10 minutes. Good afternoon, members of the Dissertation Council. I will not read out my report from beginning to end. Well, this is a positive report. I suppose I should be brief in order to save time and to have time for the academic discussion. However, I would like to emphasize that the dissertation is written on a very topical issue. The dissertation throws light on the rear support of aviation operations in the defense of Leningrad. The dissertation allows us to look at the role of rear support from a new angle. And here we have many questions like, why did the Battle of Leningrad last for so long? Why was it difficult to organize an effective air bridge and to provide both the military and the citizens with the necessary support? Why were they unable to deblockade Leningrad in September? And all these questions are closely related to what is written in the dissertation. I'm not going to discuss the structure of the dissertation. However, I would like to say that the subject and the object of the dissertation, as well as the chronological frame, are correctly formulated. I would like to emphasize that the degree seeker uses different resources for his dissertation, and the author of the dissertation was able to collect materials from different resources, different archives. This allows him to give a complete picture of what was happening during the defense of Leningrad. The dissertation also has scientific novelty, and Mr. Prigodich talked about scientific novelty in his presentation. So I suppose the dissertation makes an important contribution to history and to historical science. The author of the dissertation was able to explain the reasons for why the command of the Leningrad front had some failures in 1941. The author of the dissertation believes that material support was in compliance with the pre-war tasks. And I suppose that this is an obvious novelty of the dissertation. The author of the dissertation also writes about the peculiarity of Leningrad as both a front and a city. The rear support and the aviation were managed by the city authorities, who were part of the military council. And in general, I would like to say that this is an original research, and I have some questions and some doubts which I would like to voice. I suppose my comments will allow him to make his work even better. So, number one, I suppose you could have reformulated some tasks in your dissertation. You focus on the process. For example, you write to analyze, to follow. You should have focused on the result and should have used such verbs as provide a quantitative and qualitative composition, provide the periodization, and so on. My second question is about this second aspect of your novelty. Namely, it deals with the qualitative composition of the material capabilities of the Air Force. The author of the dissertation demonstrates a very good knowledge of the sources, including archival sources. He is familiar with many important documents. And before the war began, the city authorities discussed the Air Force in Leningrad. And they came to the conclusion that the Air Force was in an unsatisfactory condition. Here I would like to cite some facts that were supposed to be very important. So they needed extra 12 groups of aircrafts. So they had to increase the number of aircrafts by 4 times. They also needed to increase the number of artillery, aviation. They also act runaways. They didn't have modern communication systems, and many pilots were not trained to perform military missions. Only 9 pilots had completed a full course of the military training. So it means that the Air Force and the staff were not ready for the wartime. The measures that were taken by the city authorities in the pre-war time didn't help to fill in the gap that existed. It is also important to talk about the industrial plants and industrial companies that were in Leningrad in those times. This would have allowed you to analyze their capabilities and to analyze what they were doing. This would have allowed you to assess their capabilities, to assess what tasks the city was able to achieve, including rear support of aviation. So I suppose you should have focused on this issue as well, as maintenance and repair are also important when it comes to rear support. As any downturn means that the field forces did not have support, did not have air support. Yes, I believe that if you had touched upon these issues, the text of the dissertation would have become even more complicated, but still I suppose that these are important issues. Besides, it should be kept in mind that cooperation between military command and the city authorities sometimes were not effective. Probably you should draw upon the documents of the city prosecutor's office. The office contains lots of documents which demonstrate the conflicts which arose during those times. So, in the end, I would like to say that the dissertation written by Nikita Prigodich is original research. He introduced new materials into scientific discourse. It has practical significance, and it can be useful for teaching and for organizing museum exhibitions. So, the dissertation by Nikita Prigodich, the rear support of aviation operations in the defense of Leningrad 1941-1944, complies with the major requirements. And Nikita Prigodich can be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of historical sciences, scientific specialty 561, national history. I give the floor to Nikita Prigodich. I would like to reiterate that it is not necessary to read out the report from beginning to end. Please follow the example and focus on the most relevant parts of your report. So, Mr. Prigodich, you can answer the questions. Thank you very much. I would like to answer the questions. So you talked about the wording of the tasks in my dissertation. I suppose that the focus on the process is also important. However, the research findings of my dissertation focus on specific results. You were also right when you talked about the pre-war air defense of Leningrad and the number of aircrafts. When I was formulating the scientific novelty, I analyzed only the general numbers. However, I should have emphasized that the situation was very uneven. Moreover, new planes were arriving also unevenly. Besides, I would like to say that in the scientific novelty I talk more about the quantitative aspect rather than the qualitative aspect. You also talked about the aviation industry and industrial plants in pre-war time. Yes, I suppose it should have enriched the text of the dissertation. However, I suppose this topic deserves a separate study. Therefore, I included in the dissertation only cooperation, only direct cooperation between the civil authorities and the military command. I suppose that repair and maintenance is also an important issue here. Unfortunately, this information, including statistical information and financial documents, is unavailable to general public. I provided some information about repair and secondary repair. However, the use of the materials of the prosecutor's office, I suppose, would be very important. Thank you very much. I give the floor to Елена Tverdyukova. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, I would like to say that my report is posted on the website of St. Petersburg State University. This is a positive report. The dissertation complies with the major requirements. So I would like to emphasize on the two most important achievements. First of all, the topic itself is a very important contribution. Nikita Prigodich provides a comprehensive approach to the topic, which covers rear support of aviation operations, and it is analyzed in the context of the use of the city resources and in the context of the cooperation with the city administration. And I suppose this is a major contribution to science. Secondly, I would like to highlight that the degree seeker uses lots of resources. He draws upon the materials of 7 archives. And I suppose you have done an exemplary work in this regard. So the dissertation is very representative in terms of the material. I also have some questions. Probably you will believe that some questions are not worthy. I'm sorry in advance. I would like to highlight some indiscrepancies. So my first question is about the geographical framework, but the upper, or rather the temporal framework. So you write down that the upper limit is June of 1941 and the lower limit is August 1944. I suppose this needs clarification. On page 44 you mention that the military council of the Leningrad front included Soviet and party workers. So I would like you to provide some clarification here. In the dissertation you included the section about the Civil Air Force. The topic of the dissertation is the rear support of aviation operations in the defense of Leningrad. In this regard, I would like to ask you how the civil aviation was connected here. It did not participate in the defense. This is a very interesting issue, but I suppose it is not within the scope of the dissertation. Moreover, I suppose you should have provided the failure of this air bridge. I'm also interested in the following question because there is some discrepancy with what I have seen before. At the beginning of October, the Soviet aviation was dominating in the air. This is the information that I drew upon from different sources. This is according to the battle logs. And Herring and Hitler in their letters mentioned that there was no active aviation battles over Leningrad. So I would like you to provide some commentaries here. There are some technical inaccuracies in the dissertation and some misprints. Moreover, I suppose you should have emphasized the research outcomes that you have. Probably you should have included some research outcomes in each section. This would have allowed you to focus more on the peculiarities of the topic of your research. However, I suppose that you have completed all the tasks. The dissertation complies with the major requirements set forth in the relevant order of St. Petersburg State University. And Nikita Prigodich can be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of historical sciences. Thank you.
Большое, вы даже быстрее справились, чем было.
Thank you very much for your report. I give the floor to Mr. Prigodich. Thank you very much for your report. I would like to answer your questions. So the upper chronological limit is June 1941. This is when the offensive operation on the Karelian area stopped. But I would agree with you that I could have expanded the lower limit of the dissertation. Thank you for your comment about the use of the term staff. There is some inaccuracy here in this formulation. I included in the dissertation information about the Civil Air Force, which provided support for Leningrad, and I did it for the following reasons. The Civil Air Force used the runaways, which were also used by the military runaways. And I suppose, in this regard, I suppose that this falls within the scope of my dissertation. The assessment of the so-called air bridge is briefly described in my dissertation, and this brief description, I suppose, provides the main idea. And you can read more detailed information in an article published by Professor Lomagin, which was published in 2019. And there is a reference to this article in my dissertation. You also mention that I write in my dissertation that it was not necessary to organize an air bridge. However, this refers to a later period. You also mentioned that I should have expanded my research outcomes, and I agree with this comment. The dominant role of German aviation until 1943 is described in a number of scholarly papers, including those by Professor Kожевников, or a 12-volume publication about the Great Patriotic War. However, there are also examples of successful actions of the Soviet Air Force at the Leningrad front. Moreover, the military general headquarters also assessed what was happening at the Leningrad front as a success. In this regard, Novikov was transferred to Moscow in order to be in charge of the Air Force of the Red Army, and there were some successful operations. However, we cannot come to the conclusion that in general the actions of the Soviet Air Force was really successful. We cannot make a conclusion about the dominating role of the Soviet Air Force. Moreover, the Air Force losses of the Soviet Army were bigger than those of the German Army. However, the situation near Leningrad could be better than the situation of other participants of the Soviet-German front. Thank you very much. I give the floor to Professor Kovalyov. Dear colleagues, it is obvious that historians have studied lots of aspects of the Great Patriotic War and of the defense of Leningrad. However, there are still many gaps and there are still many issues that need more research. It is possible to do so if we introduce new archival documents into scientific discourse or reassess and re-evaluate older documents. One of the merits of the dissertation written by Nikita Prigodich is the fact that the author draws upon of numerous documents, including those that are stored in different archives. He also draws upon many other sources. So it is clear that the use of all these documents and new approaches allow us to state that the dissertation covers new issues such as the peculiarities of defense operations and the peculiarities at the Leningrad front. This also provided for the new strategy in the use of Air Force. When I'm talking about the merit of the dissertation, namely the use of archives, I would like to make a comment here as well. I'm not talking about grammatical inaccuracies or spelling mistakes. There are also some stylistic inaccuracies in the dissertation. I suppose it is quite common for postgraduate students when they start using the language of the materials that they use. So sometimes it is quite unclear if it is the language which was borrowed from the documents written in the 20th century, or whether this is the author of the dissertation who is trying to copy the style of those documents. So the author of the dissertation sometimes uses the language which was typical of the documents written in the middle of the 20th century. Moreover, I would like to say that the cooperation between different types of forces is a very interesting one. It is also a relevant issue. We have talked numerous times about the fact that aviation was regarded as the elite part of the forces. I also would like to say that I'm really sorry that you do not draw upon my book. We shouldn't forget about the fact that many pilots were undertrained, and this explains why the Air Force couldn't dominate on the front, because the German pilots were highly trained pilots. And in my report I make an example of the Spanish guerrilla pilots. One of the pilots confused the geography, and it led to the general failure. So the training of pilots is an important issue here. The documents usually focus on the successful aspect, and the documents usually disregard the problems. But young soldiers had to conduct military missions, but they were not highly trained for these missions. I would like to emphasize that aviation was an elite of the armed forces. So I suppose you should have explained the role of the aviation in the rear support of Leningrad in general. For example, you should have talked about the evacuation of the cities of Leningrad, including the evacuation of many famous citizens of Leningrad. My comments are rather pieces of advice than comments. In my opinion, the dissertation by Nikita Prigodich, The Rear Support of Aviation Operations in the Defense of Leningrad, 1941-1944, complies with the major requirements set forth in Order 6821/1 as of the 1st of September 2016, and Nikita Prigodich can be awarded the academic degree of the Candidate of Historical Sciences, Scientific Specialty 561, National History. Thank you very much. You can answer the questions. Thank you very much for your report and for your comments. The actions of the aviation were important during 1942-1943. In my dissertation, I provide only general analysis. At the same time, expanding the topic due to the use of more historical resources would have made my dissertation even better. I would like to emphasize that poor training of pilots does not fall within the scope of my dissertation. However, it may help us better understand what was happening during the defense of Leningrad. In September 1941, the evacuation of citizens was not a priority. However, on the 22nd of September, a plane evacuated a group of scientists, and the city authorities compiled a list of people that were to be evacuated. The list also included famous people, including Anna Akhmatova. Between the 25th of September and December 1941, 58,301 people were evacuated from Leningrad. I agree with your comment about the stylistic inaccuracies in my dissertation. And thank you very much for your comments. They will be very helpful for writing a monograph. Thank you very much. I give the floor to Елена Krasnozhonova. Dear colleagues, this is my report on the dissertation by Nikita Prigodich. My report is published on the official website of St. Petersburg State University. It's a positive report on the dissertation. The dissertation deals with the rear support of aviation operations in the defense of Leningrad. The topic of the dissertation is relevant, and the dissertation also has scientific novelty. Besides, I would like to highlight that the dissertation contains valuable historiographical analysis. It proves that the author of the dissertation analyzed the body of knowledge that is directly or indirectly related to the topic which he is researching. The dissertation also shows the dynamics of historiography. This allowed the author to formulate the main research problem. The author draws upon different archive sources. He analyzes a large number of historical material which allowed him to provide credible outcomes. And I would like to highlight again that he uses a very credible research base. The dissertation, the structure of the dissertation is in line with the tasks of the dissertation. The academic degree seeker identified the subject and the object of the study as well as the framework. I find some of the research outcomes really interesting. For example, the research outcome about the necessity to attract new resources after the blockade of Leningrad in September 1941. It became really challenging to provide support. Including the provision of spare parts. The author also emphasizes that the mobilization of the industrial base was instrumental for maintaining military capabilities. The transformation of Leningrad plants and the mobilization of the workforce were also instrumental for this topic. However, I would like to say that I also have some comments and have some remarks to make. I hope they will help the author in his future research. First of all, you should have provided more elaborate explanation of the mechanisms of cooperation between military and civil authorities. You could have talked about the positive and the negative aspects here. I suppose you should have analyzed the labor production at aviation plants in Leningrad. My colleagues have also mentioned that you use lots of resources, but I suppose you should have also used periodicals in your dissertation. However, the comments and the critical remarks do not change the overall positive assessment of the dissertation. The dissertation by Nikita Prigodich, The Rear Support of Aviation Operations in the Defense of Leningrad, 1941-1944, complies with the major requirements set in the relevant order issued by St. Petersburg State University, and Nikita Prigodich can be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of historical sciences. Mr. Prigodich, you have the floor. Thank you very much for your report. I would like to make some comments here. Cooperation between military and civil authorities is really interesting. However, it concerns not only the aviation. My dissertation focuses on analyzing direct cooperation between civil and military authorities. However, a comprehensive approach will also be interesting. He also asked me about the increase of labor productivity in Leningrad. Professor Lomagin also asked a similar question. I suppose that that's a very broad topic and it requires a separate research paper. While I was writing my dissertation, I read periodicals as well, including different newspapers, both military newspapers and civil newspapers. I published the analysis of periodicals in a scholarly paper. However, I suppose I should have included this data in my dissertation. Thank you very much. I give the floor to Professor Timofeev. Professor Timofeev, we can see you. Now we would like to hear from you. Dear colleagues, I would like to say that the report on the dissertation is positive. The topic of the dissertation is the rear support of aviation operations in the defense of Leningrad. It is worth mentioning that the topic of the dissertation is a complicated one. It deals with three types of aviation. The author of the dissertation writes both about military aviation and civil aviation. So I suppose you have done very meticulous work. And you made an attempt to provide a clear picture of what was happening at the Leningrad front. Therefore, I suppose that the dissertation is interesting not only from the point of view of history, but also from the point of view of analyzing a complex bureaucratic mechanism. There were both there were some inefficiencies. However, the bureaucratic mechanism also provided support of the aviation operations. I'm at a disadvantaged position, as my colleagues have already mentioned what I was planning to say. However, there are some comments I would like to make. I hope these comments will help Nikita Prigodich to write a monograph based on the dissertation. First of all, you did not make use of periodicals in your dissertation. I am not talking about the emotional aspect here. Here I'm talking about the propaganda, about the ideological aspect. Equipment is not the only effective tool. The propaganda work is also an effective tool. You mentioned different events, such as concerts at the front in the dissertation. However, I suppose you should have paid more attention to the aspect of propaganda. Unfortunately, you disregarded this in your dissertation. Probably you wrote about it in your paper. I suppose this topic should be included in your monograph. Besides, I would like also to comment on the following thing. I suppose you should have made footnotes instead of giving a list of sources. It would have been easier for the reader then. And finally, I would like to say that you probably should have focused more on Leningrad industry and resource base in your dissertation. You touch upon this topic in your dissertation, but I suppose it merits a separate research paper. However, the comments do not change the overall positive assessment of the dissertation, and the dissertation by Nikita Prigodich is an original research. The topic of the dissertation is relevant. The research outcomes are credible and valid. The dissertation makes contribution to the history of the defense and blockade of Leningrad, and also to the history of Russian aviation. The dissertation by Nikita Prigodich complies with the major requirements set forth in the order number 11181/1 as of the 19th of November 2021, and Nikita Prigodich can be awarded the academic degree of the Candidate of Historical Sciences. The dissertation is compliant with sections 9 and 11 of the above-mentioned order. Thank you very much. Mr. Prigodich, you can answer the questions. Thank you for your overall positive assessment of the dissertation. I would like to make some comments about your questions. You asked me about periodicals, and Professor Krasnozhonova also made a similar comment. I would like to say in this regard that some papers described the actions of specific pilots. Besides, I would like to say that I made a list of archive materials as it was more convenient to do so while writing the dissertation. So I suppose it was not inconvenient for the reader. You also mentioned the fact that I could have written about Leningrad industry. However, I wasn't able to include this information in the text so that the dissertation is balanced. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm the last person to read out my report. I'm both in the easiest position and in the most challenging position. A lot has been said, a lot. But on the other hand, I also have to add to what has been said before. I would like to say that my report contains the positive assessment of the dissertation. In the dissertation, you write about the reasons for high losses during the defense of Leningrad. My colleagues have mentioned this before, and I suppose Nikita Prigodich was able to show the resources for such losses, non-combat losses. They included repairs, aircrafts and aircrafts that were hit by their own soldiers due to poor training. And my recommendation is as follows. The history of you write down that the history of the blockade of Leningrad has been studied a lot. And some questions arise here. Why are you writing the dissertation then? Why did we establish a separate institute and also a separate laboratory to study the defense of Leningrad and the blockade of Leningrad? So I suppose this is an inaccurate statement. You also write about the rear support. And the rear support includes both military, financial, and other aspects. But you don't write anything about the financial support in the dissertation. You provide one example. You write about a pilot who was arrested for misconduct. I suppose you didn't write about the financial aspect because you don't have access to materials. Or rather, you have maybe limited access to materials. I would be remiss not to mention that Nikita Prigodich participated in a scientific project. The project included identifying and publishing a number of archival materials which deal with management decisions. The university published 3 volumes of such documents. Blockade in the decisions of party management, and Nikita Prigodich was involved in this project. At the end, I would like to say that the dissertation by Nikita Prigodich complies with the major requirements set forth in the relevant order issued by St. Petersburg State University. And Nikita Prigodich can be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of historical sciences, scientific specialty 561. The dissertation is compliant with sections 1 and 11. Would you like to make comments? Thank you very much for your positive assessment of the dissertation. Yes, I agree with you. The statement that the blockade and the defense of Leningrad has been substantially studied. This is an inaccurate statement. We have introduced new sources into scientific discourse, and moreover, now we have gained access to the documents to which we did not have access before. The financial support of aviation is a topic which is difficult to study because the documents are closed, the documents are classified, and I should have mentioned this fact in the dissertation. I was able to provide some information about the financial aspect. It was a mistake made by the person working in the archive. That's why I got access to this information. There's also a misprint in my dissertation. I would like to say that I'm sorry. And this is, you say that is my misprint, but this is not so. This is what I found in the resource, in the document. Yeah, I suppose this was a foreign name, which, yes, this is a mistake in the document. It is not a mistake in the dissertation. Is everyone satisfied with the answers? Yes. Now we can give the floor to the audience. Does anybody want to say something or to make a presentation? So, do the members of the audience want to say something? Yes, the floor is yours. Please don't forget to give your full name, your position, and so on. Good afternoon. I'm a second-year student. My name is Nikita Yakovlev. Thank you very much for your dissertation. I suppose it will be very interesting for those who are interested in the history of aviation. I have 3 questions. Did you take into account the rear support of the Russian-Finnish War? The second question. You mentioned that in 1941 2 airports were added, Lavinsari and Siskari. These are runways on the islands. So how can you characterize their rear support? You have already been asked about non-combat losses due to lack of repair. Can we say that the repair of the planes was not up to the par? Thank you. Thank you very much. You can take your seat. You mentioned the Russian-Finnish War. I write about it in the first chapter of my dissertation. Yes, the experience was analyzed, and that is why they started the restructuring of the rear support. And I write about it in my dissertation. You also asked about 2 island runways. Here I would like to say that the runways could be used in case of emergency. So they didn't need as much rear support as the other runways. These runways were necessary until 1944. They were used as backup runways before 1944. The last question was about the repair of aircraft. Here I would like to say that the quality of the repairs sometimes had an impact on non-combat losses. Unfortunately, we don't have access to this information, or have limited access to this information, including statistical data. However, we have statistics about how often the repairs were made and about the volume of reports. And this statistics is included in the dissertation. These statistical data allowed me to come to some important conclusions. Thank you. Thank you very much. Have we received any questions via email? No questions. Now I would like to give the floor to Professor Sobolev. Please tell us about the academic degree seeker and his work. I would like to say that I'm really satisfied with the academic discussion that we're having here. It's not my assessment, I mean that I am responsible for this dissertation. I'm responsible as a research supervisor. I suppose the drawbacks of the dissertation are not that serious. However, I would like to say that the defense procedure was really very well done. I would like to say that our cooperation with Nikita Prigodich has a long history. He approached me when he was a first-year student. He came up to me and said that he wanted to write a book about Novikov, and I realized that this young man would not be satisfied just with the notes about Novikov, and he will continue his research. And I was right in assessing Mr. Prigodich. Now talking about the responsibility for the drawbacks. I didn't like some wording in the dissertation, for example, the one that you have mentioned, this state, the blockade of Leningrad and the defenders of Leningrad has been substantially studied. But the point is, this statement was written a long time before. And we really hope that we'll continue studying this topic. This is a long work. And now I was able to see with my own eyes that he has done a lot of work. And I suppose the dissertation is really interesting. And there's a proverb which says, I could easily go on surveillance mission with this guy. And I hope Nikita Prigodich will become my colleague. I hope he will work at our department. He's a man of integrity. And I believe that our department has trained a really good specialist, a really good historian. Thank you. Does anybody else want to say something? Now I have to ask a question. Do you have any questions or objections about the procedure, including the participation online? Professor Lomagin? No. Professor Krasnozhonova? No. Professor Tverdykova? No. Professor Timofeev, no. Mr. Prigodich, no. Okay. Professor Timofeev, do you have any comments? I would like to say that I do not have any questions or comments about the procedure. We can have a break, but I don't think we need it. So I suppose we should save time. So it's 6:40. Moscow time. So I suppose we don't need a technical break. Now let us continue. We're beginning the open voting on the issue of conferring the academic degree. Scientific Specialty 561, National History. Now I would like to read out item 11 of the order that has been mentioned. The academic degree seeker shall make references to the sources that have been used to write the dissertation. If the academic degree seeker uses the research findings obtained by the degree seeker themselves, or in collaboration, the academic degree seeker shall point this out. We have already mentioned that the dissertation is compliant with section 11. The decision of the Dissertation Council is positive provided more than 50% of the council members have voted in favor, in conformity with section 23 of the order. Professor Lomagin, what's your opinion? I vote in favor. Professor Tverdykova, what's your opinion? I vote in favor. Professor Krasnozhonova, I vote in favor. Professor Kovalyov, what's your opinion? I vote in favor. Professor Timofeev, what's your opinion? I vote in favor of conferring the academic degree of the candidate of historical sciences to Nikita Prigodich. Yes, I agree with my colleagues. I suppose you should publish a monograph based on the dissertation, and I think it will be a very interesting book. So I vote in favor of conferring the academic degree. So 6 people voted in favor of conferring the academic degree. So out of 6 members of the Dissertation Council, 6 members voted in favor, nobody voted against or abstained from voting. So we award the academic degree of the candidate of historical sciences, scientific specialty 561 national history, to Nikita Prigodich. Now I give the floor to the academic degree seeker. Dear members of the Dissertation Council, thank you for your positive assessment of the dissertation, and thank you for your recommendations. They will be valuable for my future research, and I would like also to say that I am really grateful to my research advisor. His support and advice were very valuable to me. He has been working with me for many years, since my first days at St. Petersburg State University. His support was instrumental for writing the dissertation. Also, I would like to thank my parents, my father and my mother, as well as my girlfriend, who have supported me in my research. Thank you. Congratulations. This is the end of the dissertation session. Thank you.